What's going on, guys? Chris with General's Comics and Pop Culture. It is the Monday after the weekend release of Black Panther, so of course I'm coming on here. I'm doing a review. Guys, I wanted to do a full-on scripted review, but I'm not. I'm just going to go off the top of my head and do the best that I can. There's so much to be said about this film, and it's going to be a lot for me to kind of stay on track because I have so much to say. But let's just start with the basics. First off, straight up, I enjoyed it. Hands down, I came out of this film, well, actually, I went in the first few minutes and came out at the end how I wish I would have felt watching The Last Jedi, because I'm such a big Star Wars fan. So that says a lot to me about what this movie did. Let me tell you first, though, we went to a theater that had the reclining seats. You know, it was freaking like $13 a ticket. It wasn't IMAX, but you know how they play the previews and they have like the dim lights still on and the sound is just like mainly the front speakers and it's kind of muffled. It's not like the full sound. They didn't change it when the movie started. So I watched I wanted to complain, but I didn't want to get out of my seat and miss a minute. I didn't even get up to go to the bathroom. I usually do at least once watching a movie, but I was glued to my chair. So the experience kind of sucked because of that, because I didn't have the full surround sound. So that pissed me off. So I'm going to be riding it was a Brendan theater. I knew I should have went to Regal and got my rewards. But anyway, so that upset me. But still, it really didn't. I mean, I was fully into the movie and every minute of it. And overall, it obviously didn't impact my, impression of the film. So let's get in, guys. Let's start with the basics. This movie, like almost every Marvel movie, had the basic elements and was extremely well-rounded. It introduced the world. It introduced the characters that play a part in this world, and it prepared you for a climax, and it finished it off and concluded in the end. Basic film, basic screenwriting, basic storytelling, basic literature, and they did it well. Adding to that, the cinematography, the imagery in the world that they created with Wakanda was beautiful. One thing that I noticed, and this may be me nitpicking, but I felt like the aircrafts flying weren't as good CGI as some of the other Marvel movies. But that might have been purpose for the whole kind of theme that it was going, because it wasn't really, I mean, don't get me wrong, it was extremely realistic, but for example, when Black Panther went into like his dream states, you could tell it was like a backdrop, but I think they did that on purpose because it brought out a certain vibe and a color that kind of actually made it look as if they were popping up the pages of a comic book. So I actually did enjoy that part. So with that said, I'm going to start going into the depths of it now, and there will be spoilers. So at this point, if you haven't seen the movie, pause it, save it for later. So getting into the characters, I thought the characters, well, first off, hats off to whoever casted Chadwick originally as Black Panther, but then for this movie specifically, I thought every character did their thing. I thought Michael B. Jordan and Chadwick Boseman were like Al Pacino and, Robert De Niro. They just, obviously I'm comparing, they aren't those two greats, but I'm making a comparison here for the film. I mean, they just played off each other. It was, it was perfect. All the side roles from Nakia to Shuri, T'Challa's sister, it was done extremely well. And I felt the tone of this movie was extremely well. As with the Marvel movie, you got a little humor, but it was very minimal for this film. And because I know a lot of critics out there, a lot of people that are hating on Marvel, like, oh, Marvel's just turned into this big rah-rah of silly jokes. And this movie did not have it. It had a few, and they were done perfectly, I thought. So, now, guys, I want to get into the depth of what this movie did, and I felt that they did it extremely well. Going into the story, there are cliches when you look at Hollywood. I will bring up like the fact of the Jabari tribe when T'Challa, the leaders ended up saving T'Challa's life, and then T'Challa said, "Come fight with us, come help us," and he was like, "No, that's your business. You haven't helped us. I'm over here. I'm good." And then of course when the battle's going on, they come. Very very cliche. There were cliche elements in this film. You had the car chases, but hey, I mean, it's action, action adventure, comic book superhero film. All that aside, cliche doesn't necessarily bring down the level of how good a film is. But my son. But the point I'm trying to make is, I walked out of this film with such a humbled feeling. And what I'm speaking of it's not necessarily a political message or even a social message, so to say. It was a message primarily in the whole of goodness within humankind. That's what I took from this film. And it was this broader kind of understanding of we're not fighting for this ideology or that ideology, or party politics, or a divide of gender or the divide of race. It was for the goodness of mankind, and through the characters you saw the battle of trying to find this. And that's why I think these characters were so well thought out and fleshed out. Eric Killmonger, first off, Michael B. Jordan did such an amazing job. One of the best villains in the Marvel Cinematic Universe so far, in my opinion. Now, I personally don't like when they try to humanize all villains to such an extent. I think it's not needed. I don't want to feel sympathy or empathy for certain villains, if they're like a psychopath. This was perfectly done though, because you saw his upbringing and where he came from. Shout out to Oakland, by the way. Seeing Oakland in this movie was awesome. I was born in Oakland, grew up in the Bay Area, hung out in Oakland for many years. And so anyways, moving on. His upbringing and the reasoning for his anger and for his shortcomings, and why he ended up turning out the way he did, and why he ended up going back to Wakanda and ultimately wanting the throne, you understand it. And this is where elements that you could call political or social, but I'm not even going to go there, but they're raw elements of the human experience. And when you look at, you can't ignore the social ideology of black folks in America coming from Africa in this movie. And not only that, it goes deeper into understanding the continent of Africa as a whole, and the history of that continent, and what has happened to the peoples of that continent. So you look at Eric's character, Michael B. Jordan, Eric Killmonger, his character grows up as a African American, as a black child in poverty in an era, of basically of the crack game, growing up in the late 80s, early 90s in Oakland. And to see his father get murdered and all that, and he actually wanted to do something, better himself, and he joined the military and all this stuff. But because he had the insight on where he was from, of Africa, it made him bitter. Because he felt, why are we struggling here when there's so much going on in Wakanda, and it's like they're keeping it to themselves? So let's kind of flip the script now to the deeper element of what I felt Wakanda is, and what they did such a good job of in this movie. I think Wakanda, in its essence, is a metaphor for a couple of things. One, how they told the story of how once the vibranium basically mutated their land, how they wanted to hide from the world. That's a metaphor for what Africa is. And this isn't people watching, this isn't about race, okay? This is history. Africa as a continent has been the most pillaged and raped continent of resources of any place on earth throughout history, okay? That is not a political stance, it is fact. We don't learn a lot of this in our actual history books. What I recommend, if you guys actually care about this, check out, it's a book called The World in Africa by W.E.B. Du Bois, and it talks about the history that isn't well known, especially to Western civilizations like us in America. So, because its natural resources, whether it be gold, diamonds, spices, oil, have been raped for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, it explains obviously why you want to go into hiding. Now that's just mankind. Power corrupts, and any time resources get in the hands of those that want power, it ends up being a negative thing, and it corrupts, and you don't want those things to get in the hands of the wrong people. That's obviously goes beyond Africa, and it's a theme in a lot of comic books. So going beyond that, though, a lot of Westerners have a false idea of what Africa is. First off, Africa is a continent with over 50 countries, with over 50 nations. So that's a misconception. A lot of people speak on Africa as if it is a country. Now, the other stereotype that we have of Africa is two things. One, safari. We think Africa as these plain fields with elephants and giraffes and the lions and so forth, the safari. And then the other is extreme poverty. We see the organizations that, the Feed the Children. We see the commercials, feed a hungry child. And, we see these malnourished African children with flies on them and skin and bones. And it exists and it's horrible. And I'm not going to get into the politics of it and the history of it, but Africa is so much more than that, and it's been so much more than that, and it is today. Actually, out of the top, I believe, 10 nations in the world, at least 3 of them are African nations. There is extreme wealth in certain parts of Africa, in certain nations in Africa. Other areas, there's extreme poverty. In other areas, there's extreme conflict and civil war, and a lot of this goes back to colonial rule, colonial infiltration, and like I said, I'm not going to go into all that, but there's a lot of bad things going on in the continent of Africa, obviously still to this day. Mainly, why? Resources. So that goes back to why T'Chaka, T'Challa, and lineage going down is the Black Panther. They keep Wakanda hidden. So what it also says, though, for again, going back to Eric Killmonger's character, to grow up in America where, regardless of how you feel we are today as a nation, you can't ignore its history of slavery, of Jim Crow, where the conditions for black folks in America actually worsened after slavery because slaves were a commodity. It's like if you go and you invest in something, right? Say you invest in a car or a TV, whatever it is, and you're paying for it. You want to take care of that. You might buy insurance for it. You're going to get an oil change every 3,000 miles in that car. You're going to clean it. You're going to take it to the car wash, right? Well, say somebody says, no longer is this car yours. Are you going to care about it? It is no longer a commodity. So you end slavery. Black folks are not commodities anymore. So now you create Jim Crow, which basically keeps them oppressed in worse situations. And that brought forth the chain gang, so forth, so on, segregation, 1960s happened, we know the rest. And obviously we still have issues today. Not going to get into that. Obviously things are much better, but still. Take these elements, and there's never been real African involvement in terms of any African nation saying black folks in America, African American people, so to say, have no African history, have no African roots because it was taken from them and disconnected through slavery, generation to generation. Nobody had that knowledge to teach them. So regardless of if it's African wealth or just African heritage and roots and a place to call home, if you know that there's something over here in Africa that is where you come from and was yours, it could leave you bitter. So you empathize with Eric's reasonings. You empathize with his anger and frustration. And he takes a very militant approach. When he's in the museum and he's talking to the museum woman, he's asking her about where the artifacts came from. And she says that this one came from wherever it came. He's like, nah, this came from whatever. And he was like, I'll take that off your hands for you. And she said, or someone else working there said, they're not for sale, or these aren't free. And he was like, how do you think you guys took them? You think you paid a fair price? You came and stole them from our land. So you understand his anger and what's built up in him. Now, another deeper, bigger picture that this movie paints is we have to understand that there are these cultural, social, whatever issues. But once we turn to what it is that we hate, we perpetuate the same thing. That's where when Eric went back to Wakanda and faced off with T'Challa, I felt you saw in T'Challa a conflict. Because he knew it was wrong for his dad to leave him there after he killed his uncle, to leave Eric there and not bring him back to Wakanda. And you knew that some of the political ideology that Eric Killmonger was speaking was truthful and factual. But it's how you go about it. It's how you handle it. So that's why we don't really have a bad guy in this film. We have two elements of where nobody is 100% right. But how do we handle ourselves for the betterment of the world, of people from in here? And that goes beyond politics. So even though T'Challa understood where Eric was coming from, he still had pride and he still wanted to defend his country. But it took through death for when Eric died and he brought him up to the sunset because he wanted to see the sunset. And T'Challa said, there's still time for us to try to heal you. And he said, nah. And I should have wrote it down. But he talked about how I'm going to bury me in the sea or throw me out to sea with my ancestors who knew that dying was better than bondage.
They jumped off
because they jumped off, exactly, because through
because they're slaves.
The slave ships, exactly. Learning something in school. So yeah, because during the slave trade, and slaves that would break free from the chains would jump over into the ocean and face death instead of being, encaged and enslaved. So again, it's very powerful, and you understand this and you feel it. But after he obviously, like I said, he goes about it wrong. You can't turn into the evil that you are fighting against or that oppressed you. You gotta rise above it. So I think we look at the end of the film and look at what T'Challa did in terms of saying we are not going to hide no more. We're going to take those chances. It's a very balanced mind state because I think he's holding on to tradition, to some of the traditions, but yet he's taking some of the more evolved, or I don't want to say radical, but I don't know what else to use, possibly radical ideology to mold that together for the betterment of not only the Wakanda people, but of the African people, of black folks in America that came from Africa through slavery and through oppression and all this stuff. And then for all people, no matter what color you are. Because if you have the ability to change the world, the technology, the resources, whatever it is, and you could do good with it, do it. And that's the bottom line of what it comes down to. And I think they did an excellent job of kind of intertwining real life things when it comes to such a kind of shaky ground of the world we live in, where we have a continent of Africa and we have a people of brown and black skin, where there's a lot of conflict in terms of race, different races, and in terms of black folks coming from America or Africa, and there's these disconnects, and there's this tangled web of sociological and economical elements that haven't came like this and really interlocked to work together, and it's really beautiful. And like I said, for those watching, I don't care if you lean one side of politics and everything, because when I watched this film, it wasn't like it was a political film. Nothing was forced politically, but it's there because that's life. And comic books have always reflected that. I mean, Captain America fighting Nazis. Comic books always reflected the sociological and economical state, which in turn transforms into politics in some form, way or other. And it drives this raw human emotion of right and wrong. So regardless of what political party you believe in, it's beyond that. It's true human compassion. So this movie was beautiful, guys. I give it, I don't know, 9.5 out of 10. I really do. I want to watch it again. I don't know if I'll get to the theaters again and watch it, but I want to watch it again. Maybe come back and do another update. But I want to hear you guys' thoughts. I thought it was well-rounded. I thought it was heartfelt. I thought the characters were fleshed out, and from beginning to end, I was, pulled into the film. And big up to all the actors involved and everyone behind the scenes. And I can't wait to see Black Panther in Infinity War, and I can't wait to see Michael B. Jordan in Creed 2. So I want to hear you guys' thoughts. Please keep it respectful, guys. As always, just this is what we love. It's comic books, it's movies, it's film. Let's be thoughtful and thought-provoking, but let's be respectful. There's no need for hate. Obviously, what's the message of this film? The betterment of all people. That's what I took out of it. Wakanda forever, Black Panther. Go see it, guys. Till next time.